as opposed to the K-12 syllabus being proposed by the government house. First of all, allow me to rebut some of the arguments said by the other team. First of all, they say that our curriculum is congested and that even if we do not change the curriculum, having more years to learn and practice the same concepts will aid learning. Although it is true that extra time for subjects aids learning, this has to be weighed against other circumstances. And in the Philippines, there are many underqualified and or demotivated teachers who are not teaching their subject matter well. This is something that should be prioritized in the overhaul of Philippine education, because going to school longer under poor teachers will just give students extra time to not really learn anything and at a high cost financially. They also said that students who graduate at older ages will be more mature and able to make better choices. It is a generally accepted fact that the older you are, the more mature you should be. But the American Academy of Pediatrics labels children from the age of 11 all the way to 21 as adolescents. Although there would be a definite difference between someone at the beginning of that spectrum and at the end, when it comes to the difference between 16, 17, 18, or 19, there's no big difference intellectually or emotionally. In fact, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry further subdivides the adolescent years, but puts age 16 to 19 together, denied, as late adolescents and at an almost equal pace psychologically and emotionally. Third, they said that it will help the Philippines to keep up with global standards and increase our competitiveness at an international level. While it is true that the Philippines currently has less years of formal schooling than many countries, including the United States, it is not true that because of it, Filipino high school graduates are not on the same level intellectually or curriculum-wise as their counterparts who have studied longer. In fact, the Federation Associations of Private Schools and Administrators, President Salazar said recently in an interview that there is no need to revamp our basic curriculum as it was studied and improved in 2002 after 16 years of study in order that our curriculum be more competitive. It is still in the early years of the transition and factor in the results of the improved curriculum and not yet making a full impact. And lastly, they also mentioned that the reality is that public classrooms are so congested that proper attention is not given, while good education implies that the teacher can follow a student's progress. Granted that we may have many good teachers, there are also many teachers who are not up to par by international standards. Without these teachers, how can we produce internationally trained students? Now, allow me to proceed to our argument. The first argument of this House is there is a lack of available and sufficient teachers needed for the extra 2 years of the K-10 system requires. Antonio Tino, chairperson of the ACT, presents the data that at present the Philippines has the worst pupil-teacher ratio in Asia at 45:1. In plain numbers, this flattens out to an approximate shortage of 49,699 public school teachers in the Philippines. The second argument of this House is that there's a lack of government funding to make up for the educational institute's shortage in facilities. The government side mentioned that President Aquino has a claim to shoulder it. However, despite how attractive this proposal may seem, it is volatile when one notes that we live in a country whose public spending for education is one of the lowest in the world, and even with the separate allocations, we have a budget deficit of 350 billion and a debt in trillions. How are we expecting to pay for this with that? Certainly, adding 2 more years to basic education will not resolve the declining quality of education, and that it does not at all address the root cause of government spending and misprioritization. How then can the government afford to subsidize additional 2 years when subsidy for the present cycle has been found lacking? The third argument of this House is that many parents and families would be financially incapable of sending their children to school for the extra 2 years. This would translate to an added burden to parents who could barely send their children to school. The government side mentioned that public education is free. However, a student would still need an average of 20,000 per school year, according to Kabataan Party's computation, to cover transportation costs, food, school supplies, and other operational expenses while schooling. The government, on the other hand, in 2009 allotted a meager 2,502 pesos a year for students, or 6.85 pesos per student per day for education. Moreover, based on the latest family income and expenditure survey, Filipino families opt to spend more on food and other daily basic necessities over their children's education needs. Now, allow me to conclude. Ladies and gentlemen, what would have happened if Ludwig van Beethoven had allowed his hearing impairment to stop him from pursuing his career as a composer? If Jose Rizal had abandoned the writing of El Filibusterismo altogether in favor of new, less challenging material? If Christopher Columbus gave in to changing the course of his journey that allowed him to discover America? I am asking this because each of these instances involve a choice of improvement over change. We as humans often tend to misinterpret alterations as a quick, easy fix, but change is not automatically equal to enhancement, and at the same time, quantity is not equal to quality. Change does not necessarily assure progress, but progress implicitly requires development. K-12 may have its place in our country eventually, but for now, let us work on building upon what we already have, one small, deliberate step at a time. Because as Rocco Ogedtemihen says, education is a companion which no future can depress, no crime can destroy, no enemy can alienate, and no nepotism can restrict. Thank you.